This is these shiurim are l'refuah shlema for Chaim Mushka Bas Netel and Kol Chole Yisrael, and Yibadi ben Chaim l'Chaim l'ilui nishmas Maris Rivka Bas Chasid Reb Tzvi Kitzaran Mushachne Afar. We're going to begin with tzedakah. Gedalit tzedakah shemekarebes esagula. And please send donations, tzedakah donations, to neshechabadcentral.org. neshechabadcentral.org. Thank you so much to everyone. A good Chodesh. We're still a few minutes before of Rosh Chodesh. So a good Chodesh, and thank you to everyone who's been joining us every evening. Just to remind everybody that tomorrow night the shiur will be live in Lubavitcher Yeshiva, beginning at 8 p.m. Doors open at 7:45 p.m. Mrs. Malka Tauger will be teaching us Hilchos Beis Habchira. After that, we will continue next week, I believe, with Rabbi Hoffinger up until Tisha B'Av. Let's say the Rebbe's Kapitel. Shir Malos, L'David Samachti Ba'omrim li Beis Adonai Nelech, Oimdos Hayu Raglenu B'Sharayach Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim Habnuya Ke'ir Shekubra Layachda, Shesham Alu Shvatim Shifteya Edus LiYisrael, Lohedus L'Shem Adonai, Kishama Yashvu Chisais LeMishpat, Chisais LeVeis David, Shalu Shlom Yerushalayim Nishlayu Avayich, Yishalom B'Chelech, Shalva Ba'armanasayich, L'Manachai V'Reya Adabra Na Shalom Bach, L'man Beis Adonai Eloheinu avaksha tov lach. V'chi Adonenu Mareinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach L'Olam Vad. V'chi Adonenu Mareinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach L'Olam Vad. V'chi Adonenu Mareinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach L'Olam Vad. Before I introduce Rabbi Hoffinger, I'd like to make a request of him, which is that since we see that this year the Rebbe's Kapitel seems to be very about Yerushalayim, and some of those the lines seem to be connected with the Beis Hamikdash. So I hope it's not an unfair request if perhaps next week Rabbi Hoffinger might say a few words about, in connection with the Rebbe's Kapitel, some of the lines from the Rebbe's Kapitel as it pertains to Hilchos Beis Habchira. No, as they say in the Hasidic world. It would be wonderful, and no pressure not to. And with this, I introduce Rabbi Hananya Hoffinger. Thank you so much for teaching us every night and continuing to teach us.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Mirza Hashem, I will try to do that for next week. Prepare something on related to the Kapitel, connected to the Beis Hamikdash. As you said, there's a very clear and obvious connection between them. Also, good Chodesh, still Rosh Chodesh. So let's pick up where we left off. Okay, and once again, if there are any questions, please just put them into the chat, and Mirza Hashem, I will try to answer them. So we are basically holding after the Mizbeach, and after the Mizbeach, we come to the Heichel, which is the main building of the Beis Hamikdash. But before that, we're going to talk about what was between the Mizbeach and the Heichel, which is the Kir, which we touched upon a little bit yesterday. So we have, when we talk about the Beis Hamikdash, I think I mentioned this already, the Rambam writes that there are two categories of things related to the Beis Hamikdash. There's the structural parts, and then there are the Kalim parts. So the structural parts are a building, which we call the Heichel, that has in it 3 compartments, even though in the Mishkan there were only 2, but apparently from the Beis Hamikdash and on, it changed. It may have been already in the first one, certainly the second one, that has to have 3 compartments, and that's integral to the structure. There's a Kodesh HaKodashim, there's a Kodesh, and there's an Ulam, which is like the entrance area. And then all of this building, which has a roof on it, is surrounded by an outer courtyard, which is essentially what we're looking at now. Over here, we have the Heichel, this building that had, as we'll see, 3 sections to it, and it's surrounded by this courtyard that's open to the heaven. And then that's the structural part. And then there's the Kalim part. And for the Kalim, he says there are 7 Kalim. It's an interesting breakdown. He says there is the Mizbeach, the ramp, they're counted as 2. There's the Kiyar and its base, the Kanoi. And then there are the 3 Kalim in the Kodesh, which are the inner Mizbeach, the Menorah, and the Shulchan, and it doesn't talk about the Aron over here. And the Rebbe explains how the Aron is part of the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. At any rate, there are two kelim over here. Besides for the Mizbeach and the Kevesh, there is the Kir and the Kaneh. So the Kir basically was located between the Mizbeach and the Heichel, but it couldn't be right here because it says that the Mizbeach has to be opposite the Heichel. It was off to the side. And in general, when we look at the Kir, there's a Sikha from the Rebbe in Chelik Vav and Parshas Truma that talks about how, on one hand, the Kir seems to be sort of even, if you could say, mechutz lamachane. It's not mentioned in Parshas Truma and Tetzaveh. It's mentioned in Parshas Kisisa all by itself. Generally, almost everything is in Parshas Truma. We have the inner Mizbeach in Tetzaveh with the Big Day Kuhana, and the Kir somehow gets left to Parshas Kisisa. Also, in terms of its location, all the Kalim are inside the Kodesh, and even the Mizbeach, which is not, it says it has to be opposite the Kodesh, so it has a connection to the Kodesh, whereas the Kir is off to the side. And on the other hand, we find something very special about the Kir. So it says that the Kir in the second Beis Hamikdash actually had enough spouts. It had 12 spouts to wash 12 Kehanim at once, because there was 12 Kehanim that were needed for the Korban Tamid, so there shouldn't be any pushing and fighting. There were 12 spouts, so this way everybody was able to wash their hands and feet at the same time. But originally, the basic halacha was that was instituted by a Kohen Gadol in the second Beis Hamikdash to 12. It was a minimum of 4. And how do we learn 4? Because during the dedication of the Mishkan, it was Moshe, Aaron, and Aaron's 2 sons. And so it's interesting that Moshe is included here, even though Moshe was only temporarily a Kohen. And the reason is because just like the Kir is a preparation, also the dedication of the Mishkan is a preparation. But that's the flip side of the Kir, which is that we have Moshe involved in the Kir, which is not involved in anything else. We also find regarding the Kir that Hashem said the Kir, which originally, not in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Beis Hamikdash was made out of copper, but the original Kir in the Mishkan was made out of the mirrors that the woman used. And Hashem said that they are the most beloved to me from all other things. And so there's a Sikha of the Rebbe that explains how the preparation for Aveda, which is the Kir, and that's why it's removed, it's outside, and it's technically needed just to sanctify the person. And what that represents is that a person has to, so to speak, cleanse themselves from anything negative, which seems to be just a technical preparation to allow a person to now serve Hashem. But nevertheless, ultimately, that's where the essence of Hashem is found, and that's where Moshe Rabbeinu was found, because the whole purpose of everything is a dir b'tachtenim. And what is the ultimate tachtenim that exists by a person? It's very often the things that are in Sitra Achra, the things that a person has to cleanse themselves from. And so the right way to look at it is that it's not some type of technical preparation to allow us to now serve Hashem, but actually that's where Hashem is found. And like we know, we find this theme many times in Torah, like on Yom Kippur, that even though we talk about the Kohen Gadol entering the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holiest place, the holiest time, and the holiest person, we also talk about the most basic things that have to do with a person's Yetzer Hara. We read about the Kohen Gadol and Achemais, and we also read about all the different arayas, which basically teaches us that it's in that place where a person is struggling with difficult things, that not only Hashem is also found there, that's where the essence of Hashem is found, together with the person over there. It's not as if the person has to work that through in order to come close to Hashem, but it's in that work that we have the essence of Hashem. And so that idea is brought out in the Kir. So that's for the Kir. Like we mentioned, the Kir had 12 faucets because it took 12 Kaihanim. It actually took 13 Kaihanim. If you do the division, maybe we'll get to the Aved at some point. There was 13 Kaihanim involved in the Korban Tamid. However, the Shechita, the slaughtering, shechting, could be done also by a non-Kohen. So therefore, there was 12 faucets for the 12 that had to be Kehanim, and the Kehanim would basically wash their hands and their feet together. They would put them, it says they would put one hand on top of their foot, and they would wash one side, and then they do the same thing with the other side, their left hand and their left foot. That's how they would prepare themselves for their Aveda. And it says that every Yid, it says, V'atem tiyu mamlechas Kohanim, every Yid has that aspect of being a Kohen. The Baal Turim says, and the Rebbe quotes this many times, that it means Kohanim Gedolim, and so that's why we wash our hands every morning as well. Just an interesting thing that it says in Shulchan Aruch, if somebody walks Dal and Amos without washing their hands, they're mischayev benavshay. And a lot of people I would hear see that as sort of a negative thing. But if you look at the context, we have a sort of sensitivity to the negative. But if you just read what it says the total opposite. Why is it so harsh and so severe? Because how holy a Yid is. And to leave Tum on a Yid who's so holy is so severe. So the emphasis is not on it being severe to leave it there as much as it is, look at what we're talking about over here, the body of a Yid. To leave tum on the body of a Yid is so severe. Why? Because the body of a Yid is so holy. And so we too wash our hands in the morning, and it says it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, like the kohen that's makadosh himself before the Aveda. And after the Kiyur, we now move on to the Heichel, this big building. So we're going to talk about this building. We're going to go through it just like we did in the Beis Hamikdash itself. We started with the outer part, the Harabayas, and then we moved inwards to the Ezras Nashim and to the Azara. We'll do the same thing with the Heichel. We'll approach it in a few steps. So first, some general things about the Heichel. So if you want to enter the Heichel, there are 12 steps to enter the Heichel. Over here, you're seeing basically the length of how much space it took up of the floor space, not the height. We'll see that later. Each step, like all other steps throughout the Beis Hamikdash, were a half a amma by a half a amma. So that means that the Heichel is 6 ammas, around 9+ feet higher than the Azara. There was just one step, by the way, that was not a half a amma. It was a step to enter from the, if you remember the previous class, from the Ezras Yisrael to the Ezras Kainim, there was one step, and it was 1 amma high. It was the only one that was an amma high. All other steps are a half a amma by a half a amma. I'm sorry, I'm just coming down with something. So I'm losing my voice a little bit. So we have these 12 steps, the 6 ammas, the 9, to go up into the Heichel. And so essentially the whole Heichel had a 9 foot above ground, besides whatever was underground that was necessary, a 9 foot above ground foundation steps, and then that's the floor. So the bottom 9 feet that were above the ground, those are all a solid foundation that's above ground. I'm getting a message here that my connection is unstable. So if it's coming across in any way, or if it's not, if you could please let me know. Okay, so we're entering the Heichel. Now, some more general information about the Heichel. The Heichel was 100 ammas high, 100 ammas wide, and 100 ammas deep. And 100 ammas is around 160 feet. So in terms of the height, it's almost a 13-story building. So 13 stories high, 13 stories wide, and 13 stories deep. Now, if you're going to look at other pictures of the Heichel, this is not the typical look. Most pictures of the Heichel show the Heichel going in the back. It gets narrow in the back, and it actually says it in the Mishnayos. It says it was Revutzakari. It was like a crouching lion. Rachav milfanov. It is wide in the front, v'tzar malacharav, and narrow in the back. And even the Rambam says it. And nevertheless, when the Rambam gives us all the details of the Heichel, if you're going to put everything in what he says, it ends up being 100 ammas by 100 ammas by 100 ammas in every direction. So there are a couple of explanations given. One of them is that it did go slightly in, basically minimally. So let's say, for example, if you'd measure it here, it was 100 ammas, and here it was 99 ammas and 5 tefachim. It went in 1 tefach in total. But there's nothing of significance in terms of it getting narrower in the back, according to the Rambam. Just one more time, if somebody can tell me that if it's fine, because I had this message about the internet being unstable, so I'm not sure if there's some type of a disconnect going on.
We can still hear you clearly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Sometimes you don't know what's happening. It says there's a good connection. You don't know if there's any connection. That's in the age of Zoom. So let's move along for some more general things about the Heichel. So here we could see what the size of the Heichel is. I actually went yesterday. I did some of these measurements on Google. Some of them I did in person. I actually went yesterday. Maybe we'll get to it a little later, to measure what I had as the Kodesh and Kodesh Galashim in the context of 770. I went yesterday to 770 at night, and I was doing some of the measurements, and Google is accurate. That's what I found out. It's pretty accurate. So the size of the Heichel is basically the whole front. We're talking about the width now of the front of 770 building here, the Shalash, the next building. Here you can see on this side, it goes all the way down till here. We'll see it in a few other directions, just so you can get a better idea. It's the full front of 770. That would be the width of this building. And imagine a building that's 13 stories high. So this is basically the size of the Heichel. Let's move along. Now the building itself was a building of the height was said as 100 ammas, but there was stories in the building. There were 2 floors. We'll see later the size of each floor, but it was basically a little more than 4.5-story building. So when you walked in, you looked up to the ceiling. The ceiling is like a 4.5-story building, but it consisted of 2 floors. And let's go now into the entrance. So the entrance to the Heichel, the first room of the Heichel was called the Ulam. And we mentioned in a previous class that all the doors in the Beis Hamikdash, all the doors, there are many doors that we spoke about, 5 to the Harabayas, 1 to the Ezus Nashim, 7 to the Azara. We'll see there's another one later to the Kodesh. All of these doors were 20 amos, about 31 plus feet high, and 10 amos, around 16 feet wide. However, the doorway to the Ulam was twice the size. It was 40 amos, 63 feet high, and 20 amos, around 31 plus feet wide. So it was a much bigger door. And in addition, it's the only doorway that did not have, or the only entrance that didn't have doors. It was always open. So it captured this idea of something much larger in terms of how open it was. We spoke about the significance of it, that Hashem says, if you open for me the eye of a needle, which is the smallest amount of thing that could be done, I'll open for you like the doorway of the Ulam, which the Ulam basically, by being double the size, it's not just a measurement, but it's an idea. Double means it's on a whole nother level, and there are no doors. It's always open, which sort of talks to the idea that we said it before, in a way, of the kiyar, that little thing that a person's struggling with, that little eye of the needle, that's not what it is. To Hashem, it matters in the biggest possible way, and that's why Hashem says, open for me like an eye of a needle, and I'll open for you like the opening of the Ulam. Now let's see what that would look like, this doorway. So we saw for the other gates, the size of a person. This would be a person who is 5 feet 10 inches tall, standing in the doorway of the Ulam. So like we already said, it was 40 amos high, 20 amos wide, around 63 feet high, 31.5 feet wide, and you could fit about 11 people, or it's like a 5+ story building. Let's see it in the context of the entire building. This would be a person standing in the doorway of the Ulam. He basically would have went up 12 steps, which we said were 6 amos, or 9 feet. And then this is the person standing in the doorway of the Ulam with the entire Heichel. Let's see it if you zoom in a little bit. Here you see, so you could see that these steps over here, this is basically represents the height of the steps. If you had a person like this standing here, it would maybe be this high, because the steps were 9 feet high, and a person was saying is around 5 feet 10 inches. Just to see it again with another person standing there on the bottom of the steps, would be someone standing. Oh, I didn't insert it. I made a separate presentation here for Neshe so that it keeps up to where we're holding it. I didn't insert it into this presentation, but I added in this presentation today, a person standing basically ends up being around this high. Okay, so let's see a little more about dimensions of the building. So we said it was 100 amos high, but it was actually 96 because there was an additional structure above it. So in the height of the actual building was 96 amos high, 100 amos wide, and 100 amos deep. And regarding the missing 4 amos, we'll mention it later, but we'll just briefly mention it now. There was a 3 amos high wall on top, like a fence, and above that there was what's called a kala oirev, which were these metal things around it, so birds shouldn't land on the edge of the building. For whatever reason, when birds land on a building, they don't go into the middle of it, they go to the edge of it. If there's nowhere in the edge to stay, maybe they want to see for a bird of prey, or if they're a bird of prey, to see if there's anything there, but they always go to the edge of buildings. They basically had these metal things around it so that birds would not go onto it. And there's different reasons given, either so that they shouldn't dirty the walls, or that they shouldn't come in if it's a bird of prey and land over there with a carcass and then bring tumah into the Beis Hamikdash. And like we said, the doorway was 40 amos by 20 amos. Let's see more of the details of the height. So at the bottom, like we already said, was the 6 amos for the 12 steps, and there was also this above ground foundation. Then next you have 40 amos, which is the height of the first floor. Then between the first floor and the second floor, and as we'll see later, also above the second floor, there was 5 amos. The 5 amos basically consisted, and 5 amos, if you're keeping track with the measurements, it's close to 8 feet. There was 1 amma of a design ceiling. Then there were 2 amos opening if case water somehow got down there, so it would contain the water, and it wouldn't enter into the next floor. Then there was another amma for the ceiling, so it's basically a ceiling of 4 amos, and then above that, there was like cement or lime and stone. That was the floor of the second story. Then above that, we have again the second story of the Heichel was also 40 amos high. Then again, the same 5 amos that we just mentioned, an amma design ceiling, 2 amas of space, another amma of ceiling, and then the floor of, in this case, basically the roof. And then finally, we have the additional 4 amas that we already mentioned, 3 amas, again, close to around 5 feet of a fence, a little 4.5 feet of a fence. And then above that, the kala oyrev, the metal pieces to keep the birds away. Okay, let's move along. So again, we're going to continue doing this in steps because there's a lot of different layers to all of this. So first of all, you're looking at this building. Where was the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim? Because they're the main parts of it. They didn't fill up the whole building. This is a huge building, and the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim were sort of encased within the building. The way I always see it, like we'll see later, there's a whole structure around it. It's sort of a precious thing that has layers of protection around it. I didn't see anything of that sort written anywhere, but just that's the visual that struck me. So what exactly? Yes, this someone has a question over here. Measurements of the second Beis Hamikdash. So yes, these are the measurements of the second Beis Hamikdash, and specifically following the Rambam in Hilchos Beis Habchira, being that the Rebbe spoke about learning the Rambam, and also that the Rambam is the only posek when it comes to halachas that were related to the Beis Hamikdash. All other poskim, when they say halachas, it's only related to what's relevant today. So he's the only posek. So it goes with the Rambam. The only times other things are mentioned is if the Rambam doesn't speak about something. So if he doesn't mention something, for example, he doesn't say the name of the shar. He just says there are 7 gates. But in the Mishnah, it tells us the names, so the names were introduced here. But otherwise, the base is the Rambam. See another point? Yes, and Yecheskel is the third Beis Hamikdash, correct. And actually, it says that when they came up from God, Yecheskel was said between the first and second. We mentioned this in the earlier class. And when they came, but it's written in a very cryptic way. So I don't remember the exact wording of the Rambam, but the Rambam basically says when they built the second Beis Hamikdash, they incorporated whatever they understood, and that was clear to them from Yecheskel, and otherwise they used sort of the base of the first Beis Hamikdash. And yes, the Rebbe did speak about learning both, Mishnayos Midas, the Rambam, obviously Yecheskel. Yes, that is correct. The Rebbe did speak about learning both, and here we're focusing on Bayis Sheni. So let's move along. So we said that it's 100 amas. So first there's an area of 22 amas. It comes up over here, a little information about it, but I removed it because right now I want to take it in steps that we could not have too much at once. So the Kodesh was 40 amas. The Kodesh HaKadoshim is 20 amas. So the Kodesh is basically around 63 feet long. The Kodesh HaKadoshim is around 31.5 feet long. And then behind the Kodesh HaKadoshim is an area of, let's get back to that in a moment, is an area of 17 amas. So again, we have 22 amas here before, which we'll see later consisted of a wall over here, another wall, and in the middle is the entranceway. But the total area here is about 35 feet, 22 amas. Behind here, we have 17 amas, which is around 27 feet. And it consisted of, we'll see later, these are various rooms. But the main thing that I want to look at over here is where the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim are, and just see how, even though they only took up 60 amas, we do have the full 100. So if you do the math, 20 and 40 is 60. 17 and 1. So we said we have 60 plus 17 is 77. 1 over here, we'll talk about that in a moment, is 78. And then the 2 over here is 80 plus 20 is 100. So in between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, there were 2 curtains. And in between the curtains, or together with the curtains and the area in between, there was 1 amma of space. And basically the reason for that is because in the first Beis Hamikdash, there was a total of 60 amas designated for both the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the wall that took up an amma was in between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, but they didn't know in the second Beis Hamikdash, was it part of the Kodesh or was it part of the Kodesh HaKadoshim? So what they did is they said, we're going to give 20 full amas. It could have been that it was 19 plus the wall being the 20th, but they weren't sure, so they gave it a full 20. Give the Kodesh a full 40 amas, even though it could have been that it was 39 plus the wall completed the 40. And then to have that amma in between, they couldn't make an actual wall, a physical wall, because the room was too high and it wouldn't have enough stability. So they used 2 curtains to separate it and have that amma there. So that's why you have this amma in between. And then for the other side, it's much easier to see how you have 100 amas. You have 40 amas of space here, again, 63 feet around. And 20 amas, like we said, is the width of the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then another 40 amas on the other side. So that's the general way that you could see the spacing. Now, in terms of seeing the size of the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, so it's basically this area here in front of 770, and it's actually very, very accurate. I went last night to check, and it literally goes all the way up to the wall and a little past the garden to be the full 30 feet. If you're a little familiar with the real estate in Crown Heights, your typical property is typical, whatever that means, 65% of properties. It's even more the case, I think, down where I am in Crown Heights Beis, in the East Flatbush, down on Linden Boulevard. Your typical property is 20 feet wide and 100 feet long. So this is 31 and a half feet wide. Oh, let's go back. And like we said, it's 63 feet wide, 31 and a half feet wide and 63 feet long. It could be it's a little longer than this. It could be it should go till the end of the garden. So this would be the size of the Kodesh. And then the Kodesh HaKadoshim has half the size, somewhere around over here. Here you can see it from another perspective. So this is basically the size of the Kodesh, and half of it would be the size of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Okay, let's move along and see a little more of the details of this entire area around the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. And this could be a little more technical than everything else we're doing till now. So I'll try to make it as clear as possible so it doesn't become overly technical. So you can see right away, this is basically what was around the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. You have a series of hallways. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hallways on this side. Same thing on the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then in the back, there were 3. 1, 2, 3. And they were 3 floors of this. So if you do the math, and we'll see it a little more later, 5 on one side, 5 on the other side is 10, plus another 3. So that's 13. You have the second thing for the second floor. So that's 26. And you don't have 39 because on the third floor, it's exactly the same except for the back. Instead of having 3, there was 2. We'll see it a little more visually as we go through it. It ends up being 38 of these long hallways. So let's go through this a little bit. So the doorway to the Kodesh, which is right here. And again, everything is scaled down to size. This doorway, like all other doors, is 10 amos wide. So the ulam was 20 amos wide. It was double. This one is 10 amos wide. And like all other doorways, 20 amos high. Now, the width of this area was 6 amos. Okay, so just 6 amos from this, there was 2 sets of doors, one on each side of the doorway. And in between, there are 6 amos. The doors, if you have 2 doors in a doorway that's 10 amos, each is 5. So when you swing open the doors, let's just see something here a second. I'm going to come back to that. When you swing open the doors, it would cover 5 amos here out of the 6 and 5 amos in the back here, which is the size of the area behind. And it says that the doors were made out of gold, but the areas that the doors opened over onto were not made out of gold. So the doors were out of gold. The areas they opened onto were not out of gold, but the rest of the Kodesh was. So this way, only when they opened the doors was the entire Kodesh plated with gold. When they closed the doors, the areas that the doors were opened up onto were then exposed, which were not made out of gold. Just to talk a little bit about these footsteps that you see over here. So it's brought down that it's not respectful. This is the house of Hashem. It's not respectful that a person goes into the house of Hashem and opens the door. The way it should be is that the doors open from the inside, so to speak, by Hashem. So what they did is there were 2 doors over here, one over here going into this hallway and one over here. None of the other hallways had doors that could exit. Each of these hallways had doors on the sides that connected them. So a person could go in theory from here. If there's an opening here, it doesn't say where they were. They can enter this hallway, enter this one. If they want to go out, they have to go from these doors. Now, between these 2 doors, only one of them was used. The door over here to the right, the one to the tzafon, to the north. It says the southern door, the one to the left, that's the door through which Hashem enters. And that door was never used. So what they would have is somebody would come in from this door in the morning when they had to do the Avodah, and there was a hallway. It doesn't say where. So this is everything's scaled to size. This is not because we don't know where it is. Somebody would come in through the side pathway that there was into the Kodesh, and they would walk into here, and then they would open the doors. This is like as a sign of respect that you don't open the doors from the outside and barge in, so to speak, into Hashem's house. But rather, the doors are open for those who are coming in. Let's move along. So let's go through we mentioned before, generally, the that there was 40 amas this way and 40 amas here and 20 amas in between. Let's go through it. So the walls of the ulam were 5 amas thick, which is close to 8 feet. Then you have an area over here called the Beis Chalifos, and it's not clear what all these areas are used for. One thing it says about this area is that anytime there was a knife that became dull, they would place it in the Beis Chalifos, which is these 2 hallways over here. They would place the knives over there. This hallway was 10 amas wide, which is around 16 feet. Then you have a series, like we said, of the hallways. Each of the walls, so let's just mention here, there were 6 walls and 5 spaces, right? Because if you have 6 walls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're going to end up with 5 spaces in between them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the spaces are basically called toim, sort of like lockers, but there were hallways practically in terms of what it would look like. And so let's see the breakdown. We have first a wall that's 1 amma thick. Then we have a hallway that's 3 amas wide. 3 amas is around, let's say, 5 feet. Then another amma thick. Then we have a hallway that's, again, 3 amas wide, again, about 5 feet. Then another wall that's amma thick. Then again, a hallway. Again, the same thing, 3 amas wide. And then finally, the wall, now the hallways are a different size. This next hallway was 6 amas wide. Again, the walls are an amma thick. And the next hallway was 4 amas wide. So if you're just keeping track, it's 3, 3, 3, and then 6 and 4 in terms of the size of the hallways. See, there's a question here. So it seems like once the knives became, it's an interesting question. Somebody's asking over here, were the knives sharpened and by whom? So all it mentions is that when the knife got a chip in it, they would put it in this area. And so I guess it could be that if it became dull, maybe if it became dull, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. It could be when the knife became dull, they would sharpen it. And by who? I don't know if it had to be anybody specific. You know, as long as the person is not tamei, because the knife is a kli, it could become tamei. As long as the person is not tamei, theoretically, it should be able to be done by anyone. It's not an aveda. Even the shechting could be done by anybody. And it could be only if there was a chip, some type of nick in the knife, then they would put it aside. Like, the question, I guess, would be, when did they decide to sharpen it versus putting it aside? So that's for the walls, for the 2 sides. And if you do and then inside over here, we have the kodesh, like we said, is 20 amas wide. If you're going to do I'm not sure why let me see what's going on here. Okay, here we go. If you're going to do the math with the 5 amas wall, 10 amas space, is a little technical. The 1, the 3, the 1, the 3, the 1, the 3, the 1, the 6, the 1, the 4, and the 1, you're going to end up with 40 amas. Let's just see it quickly. 5, 15, 16, 19, 23, 24, 27, 28, 34, 35, 39, and 40. And same thing here. 5, 10, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 6, 1, 4, 1. And then the 20 amas of the Kodesh. And then for the other direction, again, somewhat technical, you have the wall being 5 amas wide. One of the interesting things that I noticed while doing this is that all the walls are 5 amas, which is about 8 feet. And if you do the math, the back wall is a very thin wall, which is interesting. How would that work technically in terms of the structure? But that's the measurement that's designated for when you do that, when the Rambam breaks it down. So you have the 5 amas wall, then you have an 11 amas ulam, which we said is an integral part of the structure. I think I mentioned in a previous class that it's interesting, I don't know the significance, but that you have this number 11 appearing by the Ezras Yisrael, the Ezras Kayanim, behind the Heichel, and also here. So we know in Chassidus that 11 represents higher than nature, 10 is the 10 spheres, 11 is higher than nature, but I haven't seen anything of that sort written anywhere. Then you have, if you remember, the doorway being 6 amas wide, because we spoke about the 5 amma doors opening and not covering the final amma. So we have another 6 amas. Then we have the Kodesh, like we know, is 40 amas. Then the space in between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim is 1 amma, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim is 20 amas. And then we have, again, a series of 1 amma walls and the spaces. So we have a 4 amma space, which is the same as the one that was here. Then we have a 6 amma space, the same as the space that's here. So there's basically a 4 immediately around the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, then a 6 on the next level, and then the ones following that are 3 amas spaces. And if we do the math quickly, we'll see how it totals 100. So you have the 5 amma wall, the 11 amma ulam, which is 16, with the doorway is 22. We jump straight to 62 with the Kodesh, 63, 83, and then the series of walls. If you remember, we said earlier it's 17 amas, 83 and 17 is 100. So we have 84, 88, 89, 95, 96, 99, 100. So I don't know, again, the significance, but you do definitely see a pattern of 4 amas surrounding, then 6, and then it drops down to a 3. And on the sides, there's also 2 sections of 3. In general, there's usually, if you find the meaning of something, it's the easiest way. Like I mentioned yesterday, the best way to remember something is not to remember it, but to know it, right? You don't remember certain things, let's say people, you don't remember what they look like, you know who they are. Also with ideas, when we know the reason and there's significance to it, you don't have to remember it anymore. So I haven't seen anything in the significance of these things, but you could see even before you get the particulars of the significance that there is something there. There's some sort of pattern around the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now let's move along into let's see where we're holding in time. Okay. We'll move along into the Kodesh. So in the Kodesh, there were 3 kalim. And there's a discussion whether it was in the inner third, which if you do it, this would be where it's located, or it's in the inner half. So we'll just go with one of them. We'll do the inner half. So there was a shulchan. So the shulchan is actually a very interesting one of the kalim, because I think I may have mentioned this in an earlier class. When people visualize the shulchan, they see this very, very elaborate contraption, but that's not really what the shulchan is. What we're visualizing is the shulchan with its kalim and with the items that are on it that are there, which is basically the lechem aponim. The shulchan itself is literally what the word shulchan is. It's a table, and it's a very simple table. It's an amma wide, it's 2 amas long, and it's an amma and a half high. That's what a shulchan. It's a regular table made out of wood, plated with gold, and it had a design either above the top of the table or right beneath it around the trim around it. That's the entirety of the shulchan. It's just that the shulchan's service in the Beis Hamikdash is to have the lechem aponim on it, and the lechem aponim is tamid. It's always there, and that's what we say after davening on Shabbos. After Musaf, we read about the lechem aponim, because lechem aponim was basically replaced once a week on Shabbos, and so it was there the entire week. The whole time the shulchan had on it the breads, and in order to place the breads in such a way that there is ear between them, so there was this whole contraption with the sticks on the side and the sticks in between them. But that's not the shulchan. That's when the shulchan is being used. It's just that it was always being used, to the extent that even when they took the breads off, there's a whole description exactly how it fit, how wide each bread was, and they folded it in, how it fit exactly on the table. And when they would remove the bread, they didn't take it off and then put the new bread on, because then there's a moment without the bread, which was, so what they would do is they would basically push it off, or as they were pulling it, they were putting it. So the lechem aponim was literally on the shulchan the entire time. And like we see, the direction that it was located in is this way. It was its length was along the length of the Kodesh. Then on the other side, we have the menorah. And again, we're going to the Rambam. Others say that the direction was different. The menorah was basically 18 tfachim high, which is 3 amas. It's around close to 5 feet. And unlike the shulchan, which is in this direction, the menorah was in the other direction. And then finally, there was the Mizbeach HaKteres, which was 1 amma wide, and again, everything is scaled to size. 1 amma wide, 1 amma long, it's really just a perfect cube, and 2 ammas high, which is around a little more than 3 feet. And so those are the items that were in the Kodesh. And it says that the reason why the Mizbeach was here, not lined up, let's say straight, is because it says that the menorah has to be directly opposite the shulchan, nothing in between. So they pulled out the Mizbeach HaKteres, the inner Mizbeach. And then we come to the Aron. So let's talk a little bit about the Aron. Let's pull it up. So I remember when I was in yeshiva one day, our Rebbe mentioned, he described the Aron. So the Aron was, let's just go back a second, I'm sorry. So let's just look at it for a moment. It's 1 amma, 1.5 amas wide, 2.5 amas long. So coming back to what we're just seeing, he described the miracle with the Aron, let's look at it this way. He said that if you measured the Kodesh HaKadoshim from here to here, it would be 20 amas. If you measured it from here to here, it would be 10 amas. If you measured it from here to here, it would be 10 amas. You measure the Aron, it would be 2.5 amas, which makes no sense. This is the idea of Makam Aron Eina Min Amido. And he explained, he said, nature, you could imagine, you could understand, you're comfortable with it. A miracle, you cannot understand, but you could imagine it. Somebody tells you, imagine a miracle happening, a water lighting on fire. You couldn't visualize it. He said, but this, Makam Aron Eina Min Amido, you can't even visualize. And so I right away started thinking, 1 second, we just visualized it. He just described to us what you would see. You would see this Aron, you'd measure it, it would be 2.5 amas. You'd have the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you'd measure it, it would be 20 amas. And when you put the Aron inside of it, it would still be 10 amas on each side. I can't understand it, but it seemed to me that I could visualize it. So I spent the next while in class trying to figure out why it cannot be visualized, until I realized one way that you could see that is what would happen if you placed a measuring tape from here to the other side of the Kodesh. It would say 0 here. It would say 20 here. What would it say here? And what would it say here? What's it going to say on the measure? It can't say 10 amas here and 12.5 here. It's not going to say 10 amas twice. That's not called taking up space. It's not just another 10 appears on the measuring tape. Somebody said it may say error, but it's not something you could visualize. You could imagine that if that happened, everything would disappear. The ruler would disappear. It's not something we could visualize. There's no way to relate to that. It's taking up and not taking up space. It's not an option for both those things to coexist at the same time. So that was the ultimate miracle that happened in the Beis Hamikdash, is the idea of Makam Aron Eina Min Amido. And it says when Mashiach comes, like we mentioned earlier from the Baal HaTurim, that V'atem Tiyu Mamlechas Koyanim, that each Yid is considered a Kohen Gadol, that when Mashiach comes, all of us will enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And so what really this is, it's not so much about whether we'll take the measuring tape and measure it. The point is that there's a revelation over here of Hashem. The measuring tape won't matter, the size won't matter. It's a revelation of the essence of Hashem, and the manifestation of that over here is in something which makes no sense whatsoever. It's a combination of opposites. It's nimna nimnois, and let's end with that. Let me stop the sharing, and we should talk about zeicha to merit to be in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Take off me on mamish. We're just entering into the month of Menachem, just leaving Rosh Chodesh, which is definitely a very opportune time when for the coming of Mashiach. We know how much the Rebbe spoke about throughout the 3 weeks, and then it became more heightened as the month of Av begins, that it's a time to add in learning about the Beis Hamikdash, adding in tzedakah, adding tzion b'mishpat tipada, also through learning Torah of Shaveh b'tzedakah. And so we should talk about zeicha to the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish, and wishing everybody a wonderful rest of your evening.